Hi guys, welcome back to another video, or your first video here, I don't know. Welcome if you're new here, welcome either way. Today I am going to be filming an unhaul, mainly just because of the fact that I recently DNF'd a bunch of books I want to get rid of, and I also just went through my shelves, both my read and my unread shelves, and decided on a bunch of books that I don't want to keep anymore. So I've split this up vaguely into sections, but there's quite a few to get through. So let's start off with that first section. So a number of these you might have seen before, but this is my pile of books that, because I have DNF'd them or decided not to finish them, I won't be keeping them on my shelves. I'm only going to be keeping them until I have filmed their respective wrap-up videos. So we're starting off with The Boyfriend by Sandy Wilson. This is a play about a bunch of young women at a boarding school in France, I believe, and it is a musical about their adventures and just them being quite boy obsessed. I'll be honest, I found this quite dull. I think that this is probably one where I could see myself watching it, but the reading experience wasn't very interesting, so this is leaving. Next we have Boy Queen by George Lester. This one was a book that I picked up on my closet unhaul video, and I tried out and it didn't work for me. I think that the gay representation in here is it's such an important story to have, and I would have loved this when I was a lot younger, but at this point in my life I'm just slightly too old for it, so this is going to a better home. Before I forget, this is about a boy who discovers drag. I actually think that the rest of these are going to fall under that camp of I picked it up because it was LGBT in some way, but I think it's too young for me. So we have The Love Interest by Cale Dietrich. This is about two spies who are sent to win the favour of this girl by a spy organisation, but whoever the girl doesn't fall for, the spy organisation is going to take out. However, the two guys start to fall for each other. So that's a love triangle book with a true love triangle rather than love corner. We have Game On by Matt Kane. This one is a quick reads book about two young people in a relationship, one of whom is really into football, and about sort of internalized homophobia in very male dominated sports, but also being young and being in a relationship where your interests are very, very different. Next is Girls in Love by Jacqueline Wilson. From the back and from the bit that I read, I still don't really know the plot of this. I just think it's about young girls discovering themselves. Next we have I Wish You All the Best by Mason Deaver. This is about a non-binary main character who gets kicked out of their parents' house when they come out and is trying to sort of rebuild their life. And finally we have The Boy in the Dress by David Walliams, this one being about a young boy discovering that his interests don't fall strictly under masculine stereotypes. So that's it for that category. The next category I have, and it's just a little mini one, is books where, because I didn't finish or DNF'd the first book in the series, not only am I getting rid of that book, but I'm also getting rid of all subsequent sequels that I own. So first of all, we have Seven String Volume 1, which is a sci-fi story about a world where the magic system is based on music. And so I own Volume 1, Volume 2 and Volume 3. So Volumes 1 and 2 I bought at a comic convention a number of years ago now. Yeah, this was in 2014. I do have them all signed. And I read the first two. I saw the third one when I most recently went to a comic convention in London. I picked that up, but in rereading the first one, it didn't really work for me. So they are leaving my shelves. Next, I have another really tiny category, and that only includes two books, where I read the first book in the series and I enjoyed it enough to keep it. However, I didn't enjoy it enough to continue with the rest of the series. So that is Magic Kingdom for Sale Sold by Terry Brooks. And this isn't book 2, this is the Tangle Box. I think it's book 4, 3 or 4. And I guess it's a bit of a spoiler for my wrap up, but I really, really loved this. I just think that this author has quite old-fashioned descriptions of women in their books, and I don't think that's going to work for me moving forward. This is about a main character from the human world where, on the off chance that it's real, he sees a advertisement for a magic kingdom where he gets to be lord of it, and because his life has kind of fallen apart, he says, on the off chance that it's real, I'm just going to apply for this, ends up getting it, and it's real, and the situation is not everything that was advertised to be. I couldn't tell you what this one is about, but this one is leaving my shelves. For the same reason, I'm also getting rid of all the other Terry Brooks books that I have. I didn't actually spend any money on these. Someone just was getting rid of a bunch of books and knew that I liked fantasy novels, so decided to give a bunch to me. So I think most of them are in the Shannara series or series of mini-series. So we have the Elf Queen of Shannara, the Voyage of the Gerald Shannara, the Scions of Shannara, the Sword of Shannara, the First King of Shannara, and the Druid of Shannara. I'm sorry that I'm really trying to like snap through these, but just because I've got so many books to go through. The second to last category is, again, quite a small one, and it's when I went through my to read shelves and decided on books that I wasn't interested in reading. So first of all, we have A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. This was a book given to me by my dad because he enjoyed it, but honestly I don't see this working for me. I'm not too interested in picking it up, so sorry Dad, but this one's leaving my shelves. The other one is Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow by Siobhan Kerem, and this one again was gifted to me, so again I don't feel that bad about getting rid of it. I don't know much about it. All I know about it is that it's a young adult romance centering around music. It also has really good reviews on Goodreads, so I never heard anyone talk about this one, so maybe one to pick up if that's the sort of genres you read. And just because the last category is quite large, I'm just going to do it in chunks, and that is books where I have already read them, but I've decided that I don't need a physical copy of them. Either I read them so long ago that they've just left my mind and clearly they weren't enough of a favourite to stay with me, or I've outgrown them and I think that someone else would enjoy them more. So first we have a couple of comics. We have Breaks Prologue, so that's Breaks 0.5 by Malin Ryden and Emma Viacelli. This one is like a short little comic that I picked up at a comic convention before I decided to actually commit to buying some volumes of the actual series, and what sold me on this was that it was labelled as LGBT. However, I haven't continued and I really don't remember anything about it, so I'm passing this on. Next we have Zeta the Space Girl and The Return of Zeta the Space Girl. These are comics that I really enjoyed at the time. It's very cutesy art style, but they're very well told stories, lots of really interesting characters. Originally I was keeping these because what I didn't realise is that this is volume 3 and I actually skipped a volume, but I don't see myself buying that. I don't see myself rereading them, and I almost don't want to reread them because I'm happy with the memories I have of the series as it stands, and I don't want to sort of take that by going back to it. So I would highly recommend for young people interested in sci-fi comics. Next we have a rather large book, and that is the art book from Vampire Night. So this is a comic series where there's sort of at a school where there's two factions, the school for vampires and the school for humans, and she's sort of caught up with the politics between the two. This is something that I really enjoyed when I was younger, but I decided to get rid of the series of my volumes of the series itself. But I kept this because I think that the artwork is really, really lovely, really, really beautifully done. However, I decided that because I'm no longer interested in the story, I don't need this anymore. Next, we have all of my Death Note collection. So this is like comics going into novels. So I have all 6 of the bind-up editions of the original graphic novel series. This is about a young man who comes across a notebook that belongs to a god of death, and he is given the power to kill people simply by writing their name in that book. I think that it's a really, really great story. The manga is great, the anime is great. I think that there's been really interesting adaptations of it, and it goes into a lot of really intense themes about good and evil and how close those two can be or seem. I'm not likely to reread these, and I actually think that my personal favourite adaptation of this series is the musical version, and these meant a lot to me because they were some of the first manga that I ever read / bought. However, I don't need to keep them, and it frees up a lot of space on my shelves, so they're leaving. As well as those, I have 2 side stories. This is Death Note, Another Note, the Los Angeles BB murder cases, and L Changed the World. These are side novels to the main series, this one in an alternative universe about the character of L, and this one being one of L's old cases before the events of the comics. This one I really don't remember that much about, but this one I remember quite clearly, mainly because it was going through a murder case from the perspective of someone who is sympathetic to the murderer or the villain. So I found that a really interesting perspective to read from. However, I don't need these. I'm probably not going to reread them, so off they go. And finally, one of the biggest stacks, or I might as well actually just use this as a thumbnail. So this stack of books is when I went through my red shelves and I decided these are books that I loved at the time, but have either slipped from my memory, or I've just decided that they're not enough of favourites for me to continue to keep them, or I've outgrown them. First, we have Outwalkers by Fiona Shaw. This one is about a world where the number of children that someone can have is very, very highly policed. It's a near future dystopian novel, and it is about a bunch of children who don't fall into that, and so that the government are trying to exterminate so that they can keep up the pretense of this sort of perfect ideal family. Next, we have Empress of the World by Sarah Ryan. This was one of the first LGBT books that I read. It was one of the first ones that got recommended to me over BookTube back in 2017-18, and it was one of the first times that I ever saw bisexuality properly represented, so that, like, this story means a lot to me for that. It's about several characters who go away to camp in America and discover their feelings towards one another and sort of working through that. So this was really special to me for that at the time, but I don't see myself rereading it, and I think this could do some good elsewhere. Next, we have Binge by Tyler Oakley. This is a memoir of the YouTube influencer Tyler Oakley, not only about his career, but also a lot of things about his struggles, like with eating disorders. Honestly, I didn't have that high expectations, but they were really met. I was really impressed by this, but again, I don't see myself ever returning to it. Next, we have A Wrinkle in Time by Madeline Lengel. This is a book that I think is very, very popular amongst young people in like America and Canada, and so a lot of people I see reading this and really loving that new film adaptation, mainly because of the fact that there's a huge amount of nostalgia embedded in this story, where that's not something that I experienced, mainly because of the fact that this wasn't a big thing for me growing up. So I read it, I really enjoyed it. I'm glad that I now know more about some of that nostalgia for a lot of people. However, it didn't mean enough to me to stay in my collection. Next we have The Fandom by Anna Day. This was the first book I ever got in a book box subscription. In here I still have like the little letter that I got from the author, and it should be signed. Yes, it is signed in there with a little book plate. I think that's mainly why I was keeping it. But again, this was an enjoyable read, but it's not one of my all-time favorites. So in here, this is a teen dystopian novel that I think really came out in a time where people were really burnt out on teen dystopian novels. To be fair though, this does a lot differently. So this follows a group of young people who are really into this teen dystopian novel, probably very similar to Hunger Games. Hunger Games. They've all just popped out of my mind, but a number of the sort of teen dystopian novels that were coming out around that time, they end up essentially trapped in the world of that novel with all of their current memories of how the novel is supposed to play out, and they get misinterpreted as being part of this world, and they have to sort of, it's a fight for survival in this world, and it gives a lot of commentary about media and interpretations of media and tropes and fiction and fans interacting with content created by someone else, which I really loved, but this one is leaving. Next we have Style by Chelsea M. Cameron. This is a young adult contemporary novel about two girls who form a relationship. This is one where, again, I read this incredibly early on in my steps of finding LGBT fiction, and I don't see this as one that I would enjoy if I reread it now. So I kind of want to keep my opinions about this novel sort of like, I want to keep the nostalgia in there rather than continue with it, but also I think that it could be representation for other people. So this is going to leave. Next we have The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. This one is so well beloved, and I loved it too. I think put it on my favourite shelf on Goodreads. However, this just really hasn't stuck with me the way that I think it really does for others, and I could tell you very little about what actually happens in the plot. Someone else would probably enjoy this far more than I did, or enjoy owning it far more than I did, because it's really just popped out of my brain. Next we have a little short story called The Queen of Cups by Ren Basil. This is a fantasy short story about a main character who has to go see the Oracle, and they work on ships. So this one is brilliantly diverse, and I think is really good representation, but also just I don't think stood out enough to me to want to keep it, so I'm passing this on. I could just squeeze up there. Next we have A Court of Thorns and Roses. Now, I enjoyed this book. I actively enjoy the series and I'm continuing with it. However, I do not like these covers, and all the other books so far I have in their updated cover designs, so I'm going to get rid of this with the aim to repurchase it again in the future. Next we have two novels by Alice Oseman, or novellas, sorry, by Alice Oseman, This Winter and Nick and Charlie. These are two spin-off novels from the book Solitaire and from the Heartstopper comic book series. So these were really enjoyable reads at the time, and I think give more nice background to the characters of Nick and Charlie. However, thinking about it, I don't think these stand well enough on their own for me to keep them. Next, we have one that I'm a little sad about because I do have this one signed, and that is The Miseducation of Cameron Post by Emily M. Danforth. So this is a novel that got a movie adaptation a couple of years ago, so I know that a number more people are now familiar with this story. It's about a girl, Cameron, who gets sent to a LGBT conversion camp and has to escape, but that's not where the whole novel is set. There's a lot of lead up to that point, and I enjoyed this one when I read it, but unfortunately there were several things about the setup of the novel where it just, I kept on thinking about how I would restructure it if I was an editor, and that's not really how I want to be reading a book, but I think it's still a really good piece of LGBT literature. Next, we have a book that's a proof copy, so that is The Boneless Mercies by April Genevieve de. This is about a group of women who perform mercy killings as a job, and it is about them taking on a really difficult mission. And I really enjoyed this at the time, however, a lot of it has left my brain. Looking back on it as well, I think a lot of it was travelling, a lot of it was quite info dumpy as well, so hopefully this can work for someone else more. And finally, we have The ABCs of LGBT by Ashley Mardell. This one was, I think, a really great resource when I read it. However, I think that it, again, could do far more good for other people. So I'll be passing on this one as well. This is quite literally a book that goes through with lots of lovely illustrations, a bunch of terms, a bunch of information about the LGBT plus community, with a really good coverage of the more uncommon sexualities and gender identities. So that is it from me. I have unhauled a ridiculous number of books. I'm now going to count them. 45 books I'm getting rid of, which feels really good, and also I think brings me back up to actually getting rid of a similar number of books to the ones that I buy. So I think my housemate is home. But yeah, I will see you in another video very soon. Bye.